We're really happy to be presenting the third session of the BC Agricultural Climate Adaptation Research Network's Climate and Weather Data webinar series. We had 2 series in June, and now we have 3 sessions in the fall. So for those that weren't involved in the earlier sessions or are new to ACARN, just going to give a very quick introduction to who we are. The BC ACARN formed about 3 years ago with a mission to increase collaboration for climate change adaptation research and extension. So that means promoting the sharing of research-based information, expertise, and resources across BC, and also working beyond BC as well. The ACARN is governed by a steering committee that has 2 representatives from the organizations that are listed there. So there's members from the BC academic institutions that have agriculture research taking place in their institutions, as well as Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada and the BC Ministry of Agriculture. We also have industry representatives from the BC Ag Council and the BC Agriculture and Food Climate Action Initiative are a key partner of ACARN as well. Also, within ACARN, it's a network, and our members are a very important part of that. Right now, we have over 400 people that have been involved in the network. That's through events or being a part of our like resource sharing and information opportunities. So anyone can join, it's free, and you can sign up on the website. You can also go and see profiles of other members there if you're looking to connect with other people who are doing work in the area of agriculture adaptation. So for this webinar series, the intent behind this, really the inspiration, was to provide an opportunity to have a personal tour of some of the climate data and data tools and data sets that are available. So throughout these 5 sessions, we have a range of experts working in this field, giving tours of the types of tools and data that they've been working on. And so this is a great chance to learn more about what's available. And also it's the place to ask your tough questions about how to integrate these tools and data into your own work. And it's a chance to connect with and know who the people are behind these. So if you're looking for collaboration opportunities or ways to bring this data into your own work in the future, you'll know who to go to. So as I mentioned, we had 2 sessions in June where we featured data and tools from Farm West and the Pacific Climate Impacts Consortium. And both of those sessions are now, they've been recorded and they're available on our website. And so today's session is going to be looking at Canadian climate data portals and the new agriculture module that they have developed. In 2 weeks' time, also on a Tuesday morning, we're going to be looking at on-demand cloud computing and open source technology and how these new technologies can be used to improve the way you can manage very large climate databases and make data more accessible. It'll be a really interesting session. And then the final session in this series is going to be October 20th, and we'll be looking at tools that are available that use weather and climate data to support better on-farm decision making. So looking at tools that help provide guidance on pest management, nutrient management, and third thing, I just slipped my mind. Anyways, it will also be an excellent session looking at those farm level. How do you apply things at the farm level? And as I mentioned, the sessions we did previously in June are recorded and are now available. We will be recording all the sessions, and they are on the Agricultural Climate Adaptation Research Network YouTube channel, where you can find this webinar playlist, so you can see everything there. And we're also putting together a resource on our website, which will give a short description of each of these data sets and tools that are available. And we'll also have links to the sections of these sessions that are relevant to those tools. But yeah, and once again, I'll just encourage you on the website, you can become a network member. It's a great way to stay connected with when new resources are available and to other events and news that are going on. So I'll give a quick introduction to our speakers today. So today we're looking at Canadian climate data and portals, and as I mentioned, the new agricultural module. And joining us, we have Christy Allen from the Prairie Climate Services Center, based at the University of Winnipeg. Christy is the research manager there at the Prairie Climate Center, and she has her background experience working with First Nations on climate change policy, mitigation, and adaptation, and also experience working in agricultural research. So her background and expertise will be excellent contributions to today's presentation and discussion. And presenting along with her is Elaine Barrow from Environment and Climate Change Canada, where she's their senior climate advisor. Elaine has vast experience in the generation, selection, and application of climate change scenarios, including scenarios developed to better understand climate change impacts on water, agriculture, forestry, and health. So all key areas. And along with those presenters, I have both Kari Tyler and Jesse Booker joining me from the Pacific Climate Impacts Consortium. Kari is the user engagement and training specialist from PCIC, and Jesse Booker is just new, working on content development and user engagement. And they'll both be providing support on the Q&A and moderating the chat. So I'm very happy to have all of you guys here joining us today. So before we jump in, I'll just give a couple of notes on some of the Zoom features that we'll be using. So of course, you guys have already been introducing yourselves on the chat. It's really great to see. We're also, when you guys have questions for the speakers, the best way to handle it is to use the Q&A box. So you'll find that in your Zoom control panel. And if you can type your questions there, then it will be easier for us to track them, make sure they get answered, and people can also vote at other people's questions. So if you see a question there that you also would like to hear answered, please, please vote it up. And the last thing that we'll be using, we'll also be using the poll feature. And Kari, maybe I could get you to just put up that first poll there, if you don't mind. Great. So I'd love to hear from everyone who's signed in what your climate data experience is. So would you consider yourself an expert that's been doing a lot of work with climate data? Are you more on the intermediate range, beginner, or are you a total newbie? I think this will be helpful for our presenters to have a sense of where the level of experience is. But you know, it's great to have a range, so don't be shy.
Great, I'm getting responses from most people, and I'll close the poll shortly. So if you haven't voted yet, please just take a moment to vote. This should be a pretty easy way to participate, but participation is slowing down. Okay, so I will end the polling now and share the results. So most of the people participating today are sort of beginners in their use of climate information, and that is wonderful. I think you're coming to the right place to hear from Christy and Elaine about this, with some third of the participants intermediate and a 15% sort of expert level. I think there should be, and newbies welcome, so glad that you are joining us. I think there should be information here for every level of expertise, and one of the things that I really want to emphasize is if you have questions for any of us, please do ask those. And that reminder that, like, if you're thinking about it, chances are someone else is. So it's really helpful if you can kind of put those questions into words.
Great, thanks for that reminder. Great, so with that, Christy, do you want to get started?
Unmute. Okay, first step. And then I'm gonna try and share my screen. Let's see. Does this come up as the whole thing?
Yes, it's not the presentation mode yet.
Okay. How are we doing now? Looking good?
It looks great.
Perfect. Cool. Well, I am Christy Allen from the Prairie Climate Center in the middle of the country, so not the furthest away, apparently. Sadly, I always like to take that place, but and we are the makers of and the hosts of the Climate Atlas. And so today Elaine and I are going to be working a bit collaboratively to give you a presentation on the full range of portals that exist in Canada right now to present climate data. So if you come across that one of us seems rude because we're interjecting in each other's presentations, it's not. Where it was actually very, very intentional. We do work very collaboratively on these portals, and so we will get a bit into kind of that ecosystem of information that you have access to as users of climate data and climate information. So with that, I'll let Elaine introduce herself as well.
Okay, so I'm Elaine Barrow. I'm the acting manager at the moment of the Data and Products Office for the Canadian Centre for Climate Services, and one of the main products that we are supplying at the moment, or involved in supplying, as it's a partnership with other regional climate service providers, is climatedata.ca. So I'll be doing a short introduction to that and some of the functionalities of the website in a few moments.
So just a quick outline on the presentation. As I mentioned, Elaine and I will be going a bit back and forth just due to the nature of the Continuum of Climate Portals. And we'll talk about that in a bit more detail as to what it is at the beginning. And then we'll go a bit into the Climate Atlas and back and forth between live demos and a bit of the information. And then we'll come around to some of the more information that is on the Climate Atlas and will be present on climatedata.ca in the near future. So yeah, and with that, I'll just begin. So I'm going to talk about the Continuum of Portals, and this I think is of most places where Elaine might interrupt me, so I'm very open to that. But so one of the things that becomes, as someone who is, Shawnee, you gave me a lot of credit at having expertise in this, but I think the reality is I'm kind of the jack of all trades and came from the outside world of climate data. And found it sometimes very confusing as to where to go for the information that I was looking for and what has access, who has what and how and why. And so we're really trying to address that within the Canadian Centre for Climate Services, PCIC, Oranos, all of these large ecosystem of climate players. And so one of the things that's starting to come to surface is this continuum of climate portals. That's really working to address the diverse needs and uses of climate data and information across the country. So this issue of climate change starts becoming integrated further and further into so many sectors and workplaces. It's becoming very aware that we're becoming very aware that there's a huge range of diverse needs for people and a huge range of tools that are useful, and not everything is useful for everybody. And so instead of trying to create one tool that is everything for everybody, which is, as I can tell you as a jack of all trades and a master of none, a really terrible model in life, where we've created, at the moment, there's 3 climate portals that are accessible to everyone that really try to address these diverse user needs as they come up. And so there's Climate Atlas of Canada, which is hosted by us, the Prairie Climate Centre at the University of Winnipeg. And then there's climatedata.ca, which Elaine will be talking about, and is a large partnership between some of the most talented climate data people that I can think of and know. And then there's PAVIX, which we will address a little bit less because it is still in development. So as I mentioned, there's 3 different portals, and there's a little brief summary of each of them on this slide, but we're looking at climate data, which is designed to provide access to climate data supports for decision-making through high-resolution climate data and mapping, location-based summaries, and a variety of climate variables. So climate data is really a data-focused site, and it's that way by design. So if you're looking for really high-resolution data, things are very data-focused, that is what you're looking for. And Elaine, if you want to add anything to that description, because I know this was the area that you have a bit more expertise in, but not unmuting. Oh, there we go.
Yeah, I'm unmuting. Yeah, no, that's a good good description. We're basically trying to provide the climate information that people need to make their local scale decision making, and we're very much a user-driven portal. So any questions, any observations that you have, there's a feedback opportunity on climatedata.ca. So please let us know, because to say it's not a set in stone data portal. It's something that we try to respond to users' needs as much as we possibly can. So it's constantly being developed and improved, and more data being added, so more functionality being added.
Perfect, much better than I could have said it. And then the one that we have on the right side of the screen is the Climate Atlas of Canada. And so that's the one that we've been working on. And it's based out of the same data and information that climate data uses, the BCC AQV2 data sets, but we use the data as to create to support evidence-based narratives around climate change. And so we really do move into that storytelling aspect and really trying to emphasize the ways in which people can communicate climate change so that it resonates with individuals at their local level, at their human level, and just really creating a bit more of I guess you could say, a social scientist side of the climate data as well, but it is still rooted in that same data. And then at the bottom of the screen, we have PAVIX, which is I personally would call it a high performance tool, but that's probably what it is. The other thing is PAVIX is still a bit under development. And so we don't have as much information on it right now. So for today, we're going to be focused really strongly on the Climate Atlas of Canada and climatedata.ca. And so I have them on the screen. I thought it's always nice to kind of get a bit of an understanding of who's supporting some of the presentation of these websites. And so I have the little funder logos at the bottom, and partnership logos at the bottom, just so you can see that it makes sense if you look at the right side of the screen that climate data is supported by Aranos, CRIM, the really fantastic people at PKIC, and especially Kari, she's great. And then the Prairie Climate Center, which is us, and Habitat 7, and Environment and Climate Change Canada supports both portals. Because we're located at the University of Winnipeg, we have a bit of a different model, but we have had some SSHRC funding to support our development and some various fundings from different federal agencies. So we do work a bit differently, but we do all work collaboratively. So we'll go through each of the portals, but just to emphasize a few of the key similarities and differences when it comes to the data aspects of each portal. So they're both rooted in the BCC AQV2 data that's been produced by PKIC. It is computed and presented slightly differently on each of the sites. And so you can see I have a little table on the left side that's just comparing some of the key differences that you'll notice if you go on the site. So the size of the grid tiles, climate data has a higher resolution than that of what's on Climate Atlas. The time steps are slightly different, and it really just depends on what your question is when you're coming to research. And then the RCPs as well, we represent at Climate Atlas, we only have the 4.5 and the 8.5, whereas climate data has the 2.6 as well. And then time periods are slightly different, and then downloadable formats as well. And then I think my final slide on comparison is just like a really rough overview of some of the resources that you can find on each of the sites and how they are slightly different. And so climate data, you'll see, has some really impressive features with the analysis tool that Elaine is going to go through, and some more high resolution local based summaries. Whereas the Climate Atlas is really stuff that's, the variables are pre-computed for you, and we really try and present the information in a manner that's understandable and usable for that type of user base. So we can go through a bit more on some of the resolution details, but this is, I think, from a high level, some of the major differences between the portals. And I can stop here if there's any questions, or if Elaine wants to interject at all, because I think the next slide goes into the Climate Atlas. Nope. Cool. So we're going to go back and forth a bit, and you'll have to acknowledge some of the technical glitches as we're going to try and do a few live demos of each of the sites, just because it's easier to demonstrate a platform doing a live demo. So just a little information on the Climate Atlas of Canada. So we are located at the University of Winnipeg, and it's the Prairie Climate Center that has created it. And the idea behind it is we have a very diverse team at the Prairie Climate Center. So we have climatologists, but we also have social scientists and videographers, psychologists, and people like me who just don't generally have an expertise, but manage to work my way through the world as well. And so we've really tried to take all of these aspects and integrate them into one site to really create a platform that effectively communicates climate change in easy and compelling ways. And so what you'll find on our site is really easy to understand explanations of data, a lot of plain language descriptions and analysis, to help really drive home some of those messages of climate change, but also help people understand. And then the final thing that you'll see is we have a lovely team of documentary filmmakers. And so one of the ways that we really find that communicating climate change and integrating climate change into people's work is to really understand the narrative behind it, because as much as data is a really huge piece of climate change, communication of climate change is also a large issue at hand as well. So, and this is where I go to stop share this screen and move into the other one. So we'll see how flawless this can go. Okay. So we're going to do a little tour of the Climate Atlas and just accessing the data on the Atlas and what that looks like. And we're going to do it specifically through an angle of the agricultural indicators that we have on the Atlas, but by no means is that a limitation. We could definitely go through a few others if people are interested, but it's all the same action. So the landing page that we're looking at here is climateatlas.ca, and there's lots of other features. You can scroll down and through and get a bunch of information, but seeing as we're here to talk about climate data, that's what we're going to go to. And so we click into the map, and the first thing you see here is a big map of Canada, and it works just like every other map. You can zoom in and zoom out. And you'll see we have some indicators at the bottom where we talk about time periods, so fairly self-explanatory, level of climate change. So here we're looking at the different RCPs. So RCP 4.5 is less, RCP 8.5 is more. And if you're looking for more information, you always can click this little I button. And then what you'll see is we have a range of different variables that we have pre-calculated on the site that you can see. So you can click through anyone and click your indicator of interest. Here we have the agricultural specific variables that we developed in collaboration with the Keystone Ag producers here in Manitoba. And so you can click into any individual one and it'll change the map significantly based on the variable that you're looking at. But nonetheless, it's starting to indicate the number of days for the frost-free season. And so we can move a bit more into BC because that seems like a region if you're looking for an area that's very specific, and to get the actual information, you just click in. Oh no, this makes it complicated. All the things are on my screen. There we go. So if you're looking for information that's related to the frost-free season, you can click over and open this region that is in Penticton. And you'll find that there's, in a very kind of straightforward fashion, we have it indicated that the length of the frost-free season is going to increase based on this climate data and this scenario from 116 to 149 days. And so it provides all the information on this little sidebar. And then as you scroll down, you can get more information. You can download all the information, or if you're really interested and want more climate data, you can go into this Explore More Climate Details side of things. And you get our local data page where you can really dig into some of the ensemble data if you want. You can look at individual models, or you can look at them all, and it gives you more opportunity to download and look at each of the variables. And so on the Climate Atlas, you can go through any of the variables. We have a variety of them. You can also change them up here in the screen. So it's kind of a rough introduction to how you can use the Atlas to find some of your climate data, and you can go through each and any one of the variables. You can go to a variety of different regions. It really depends on what you're interested in, how you're interested in answering your question. That would be my rough, the Climate Atlas. Elaine, I think maybe do you want to go too?
Click the right unmute button. Yeah, so if you want to go on to climatedata.ca, I don't, right now.
Before we move on to the Climate Atlas, we do have one question in the Q&A, and maybe we could just take a pause for a few more questions on the Climate Atlas. But the question here is, for the Climate Atlas, for past data, is that based on actuals, like actual data, or model data?
So we have it based on the model data here. So we have the historical trends if you're looking in this little sidebar where my cursor is. You can see the historical trends, which are based on ACARN data, but we do use this number is based on ensemble data. So
great. I also have another question on the Climate Atlas. Can you only search by individual weather station, or can you combine data from various stations to create a regional average or regional overviews?
So for us, you search by all the weather stations. You can download historical data, but I believe we just have the average of the bunch.
So you can download the historical data
Yeah.
and create your own average. I see it there. Great, thank you. Any other questions on the Climate Atlas before we move on? Feel free to type them in. Okay, well, you can also post questions at the end. So yeah, let's move on to Elaine and look at the next tool.
Okay. Let's see if I can do this. Okay, so hopefully you can all see the landing page for climatedata.ca on your screens. Basically, this portal is providing high resolution data to help make decisions. There are a number of different ways that you can access the climate information. You can either search by location, by variable, or by variable. And there's also a quick start menu which has the same options here. The sector information at the moment we have for the health sector. This is where we will be adding the agriculture module very shortly, and which I'll talk about a little bit later on in the presentation. But that's also another way of accessing the climate information through the sector boxes too. So very quickly, if we go through search by location, basically you can just put in wherever you're interested in. I'm in Regina, so I'll just stick Regina in there, and it comes up with, let me just minimize that, a little summary about past current conditions and projections for the future. And this is just the sort of like the annual summary. On the right hand side, you see a little map visual of the grid box where it's reporting from. And at the moment, this is sort of like information from a single grid box for the city rather than the whole city by itself. And it's taken from the ACARN database, which I think is tied to where the city hall is in each of the cities and towns across the country. So that's why the marker is located there. If you scroll down further, you'll see time series of annual information for a number of different variables. So first of all, we have the temperature variables. If you click on this menu, it takes you down through the temperature related variables. So we have hottest day, mean temperature, minimum temperature, and then a number of days above or below specific maximum and minimum temperature thresholds. And you can just click on any one of these and it brings up the time series graph of from about 1950 through to 2100. All of the information that you see on the screen now is all climate model output. So it's all simulated data. It's bias corrected and downscaled to the 10-kilometer grid box. And it's tied to, I would say tied to, it's bias corrected using the ACARN ANNUSPLIN dataset, which you can add to the graph by clicking on interpolated observations here. And this is the same data set as you've just seen on the Climate Atlas. So this shows you the gridded historical, the orange line is actual gridded historical information, whereas everything else is climate simulations. As Christy mentioned, it's what's known as the BCC AQV2 data set. So it consists of 24 climate models which have taken part in what's known as CMIP5, which is the fifth phase of the coupled model intercomparison project. And we have provided information for 3 of the emissions scenarios, RCP 2.6, which is a low emissions scenario, 4.5, which is mid-range, and RCP 8.5, which is the high-end emissions scenario. And the graph is basically showing the median values with the bold lines. So half of the models show results above that number, half below, and then the range is given by the 10th and 90th percentile. So there's still a couple of model runs which are above and below the envelope, the colored envelope for each of the RCP. So red is obviously the high emission scenario, green is a mid-range, and blue is the low RCP 2.6. And if you continue scrolling down, we have precipitation variables, we have wet days, total precip, and then further down we have a number of other variables. So we have frost days, cooling degree days, growing degree days with 2 different base temperatures. We also have degree days above 0, which was developed after we did the health module. One of the case studies that we showcase on the health module is to do with the development of the black-legged tick for transmission of Lyme disease, and that's related to the number of degree days above 0. So we constructed that across the country as well. And then tropical nights, so days when minimum temperatures don't cool down very much, and they're known as tropical nights. You can play around with the graph a little bit. You can, by using this slider bar at the bottom, you can focus in or out on specific time periods. If you just look interested in a certain 30-year period in the future, you can do that. You can also turn on and off the different emissions scenarios, so you can see the individual scenarios more clearly. And then by just using this little hamburger menu at the side, you can download the data, or you can download the image, the time series graph, in different formats. If you don't want to go through the location feature, you can search by variable, and again we get this list of different variables. So if I just select one of them, and you can select your emissions scenario, we'll stay with 8.5, and then you end up with the map of Canada showing the projections for mean temperature into the future, and you use a slider bar along the bottom just to move through by 30-year period. So these are all 30-year averages that you're seeing out into the future. You can select annual or monthly. We will be adding the seasonal information hopefully soon, and you can also reselect choose a different RCP, or you can compare them. So you can put them side by side and see the differences over time in the projections for the different RCPs, with the one on the left is the map on the left, and the number on the right is the map on the right. So that's the basic functionality, and same as the Climate Atlas, you can zoom in, and if you go right down to the grid box level where you see them, you can click on any of these, and the time series graph will come up for that location, just as like going through the search by location feature. But the one bit I wanted to really sort of introduce you to is the analysis page, which you can access by clicking on Analyze. And basically, we've developed this because we recognize that a lot of the thresholds that we've used for some of the climate indices are not necessarily exactly the right ones for your location. So the analysis page allows you some control on calculating the indices yourself for your location. The first step in the process is to choose a data set. At the moment, it's this BCCAQV2 data set. We will be adding hopefully some functionality to do analysis with station data, observed station data, so that you'll be able to do your assessment using observed conditions and then look at how it changes into the future. The next step in the process is to select your location. At the moment, the only option that we have is grids. This is the grid that you just saw on the map. And basically, we will be adding watersheds and census regions and at the moment on the health sector, the data is already there available by health region, and that will be added to this as well. But for the moment, we just have the grids. And when we add in the different sort of regional summaries, the information that you'll get will be the average for that region rather than an individual grid. So we'll just click to continue. The same, you can zoom in or out, or you can simply put search in for a town. So I will do the same again, put in Regina, and it brings up the map of the grid boxes. You can select any number of grid boxes to do the analysis for. They don't have to be connected. You can have them anywhere. And when we've worked through the whole process of doing the data analysis, the file that you get will give you the results for each individual grid box. So it's not doing an average of them at the moment, it's just doing each individual grid box, but you can select multiple grid boxes at one time. So once you've selected which grids you're interested in, you can then look at the list of variables or indices that we have. So there's quite a long list, and as I mentioned earlier, we're a user-driven website. So if there's something here that you think is missing or you don't see that you would like to be able to calculate, let us know, and we'll see what we can do to add it to the list. So there's some precipitation variables. We've got, again, days above Tmax and Tmin value, specific thresholds, and heat waves, a number of indices describing heat waves, and then degree days above specific threshold, degree days below. So this might be most useful for the agriculture sector. We have on the general part of the portal, we already have degree days above 5 and 10 degrees Celsius, but here you can specify your own threshold. So once you've selected which variable you want, this little blue banner drops down, and this is where you input your degree day amount, the threshold that you want to use for your degree day amount. So let's say 14 degrees. And then you can choose the time frame over for which you want the information to be returned. So I'm going to use the whole time period, 1950 to 2100. And then at this stage, if that's all that you want to do, you can enter in the characters here to prove you're not a robot, put your email address in, but you may want to go a little bit further and change some of the options we have in terms of which models you would like the information to be calculated from. We have what's known as the PKIC 12. This is a set of 12 models from the 24 models that are in the BCCA QV2 dataset. And PKIC did a lot of analysis of the model results, looking at changes in the mean values as well as changes in the extremes. And they identified 12 models which capture most of the range of the uncertainty in the future climate projections. And by adding in, other models, it didn't affect the range to any great extent. So there's a smaller subset of models if you're interested in that. Or if you select all models, it gives you the whole, the calculations are done on the 24 models comprising the BCCA QV2 dataset. You can select a number of different, from the different RCPs. At the moment, you can just do one at a time. Hopefully we'll change the functionality in the future so you can select all or one or two at a time if you want to. And you can also change the percentiles that you want to be reported. So we're not actually giving you the model output itself. We're reporting the information in percentiles in very similar way that you see on the time series graph. So at the end of this process, you would be able to reconstruct one of those time series graphs, but you're not getting the actual model output itself from each individual model of the data set. And then you basically put in your the characters here, put in your email address and submit the job. If you get no response, so if you put your email address in here and you do send request and nothing happens, it may mean that you've forgotten to fill in the threshold in this part of the selection in the analysis page. And I have done that. You select the variables from the list and you actually forget to put the number in that you want. So if it goes through successfully, you will get a little box pop up that says success, your request has been submitted. And depending on the traffic on the server at the time where the calculations are being done, it could take up as much as 90 minutes to do the processing. Every time I've used it, I've got information back within 20 minutes, sometimes, you know, within a few minutes. It really does depend on the traffic on the server. I'll just say, if you wanted to go back and do the same analysis, or for the same grid boxes, but choose a different variable, you can do that. You can just go back here and select a different one, put in your threshold and go through the process again. If you want to go to a different location, then we advise that you refresh the page and start again from the beginning. But that's the basic introduction to do the analysis page. So does anybody have any questions?
Yeah, there's quite a few questions, so let's take a pause here for those. And some of these are going back a little bit. So,
okay.
So one of the questions is, can you get moving averages for past measured climate data to evaluate past predictions?
No. Simple answer. Not really, no. The other thing I should mention, which I didn't at the time, in the variable menu here, we do provide access to station data. So this is the observed station data from the Environment Canada catalogue. So you can look at the climate normals. But you can also, if you go to the download page for downloading data, if my laptop is going to respond. Let's go home, actually. We'll just do this. Okay. Oh, we'll try it here instead. So if we go to the download page, you also have the option here, as well as downloading all of the climate projections, we also have access to the station data. And here you can basically just, it populates with the Environment Canada weather stations, and you can zoom in or you can put in your location and it will come up with all the weather stations, and you can select any number into this menu up here and download the real-time data. So that gives you data up to what's recorded till about a couple of days ago. So it's very real time. But no, we don't do any analysis of previous projections and how well they simulated what actually happened.
So just to clarify, because one of the questions is about how frequently the actual gridded historical data is updated using ACARN data. So it's updated every few days?
No, we don't. What the projections which you see here, let me just bring up one of them. These have all been pre-calculated, and the Annuspin data set that they was used to bias correct them, I think, went up to 2013. So the bias correction is over the 1950 to the 2013 period, but these will not change. What you see here will be here until we update with the next set of scenarios, which will be coming from the 6th phase of the coupled model intercomparison project, which won't be for at least another year. The data is just being loaded from the different modeling centers up into the cloud for researchers to use. So there won't be any updates to this information until there's a new set of scenarios come out, which will be probably 2021, end of 2021. So.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. There's also a question around backcasting. And so the question is, and this might have been in the earlier part of the presentation, which Christy was showing, but the observed historical data did not match the modeled historical data very closely in the time series. So the question is around, don't the models have to be updated so that they're backcasting accurately? And so the question is, like, why are those not matching?
There's quite a lot of information that goes into that. The models are continually being developed, and one of the processes that they do undergo is looking at how they simulate current climates. But obviously the model performance it can be assessed at a number of different scales, so the global, continental, regional, and then down to local. So these are global climate models, so they're working at quite a coarse resolution, and because of the way the models are constructed, and they have this coarse resolution, they can't capture every single process that's going on in the atmosphere that affects our climate. And we see this when we look at, if we put on a gridded historical data set onto the model simulations, we see that there's a bit more variability, and it's basically because of the different spatial scales of the model. You would expect because this set of model observations have been bias corrected and downscaled to this 10-kilometer resolution, you'd expect to see that there's overlap, but you wouldn't necessarily expect that it's going to match. And the reason for this is that the climate models themselves don't take in any observed information. And so the state of the atmosphere that caused the observed record that we're representing through this gridded historical data set is different from the state of the atmosphere in the models. And that's basically due to the natural variability of climate. And you can run, if you have a single climate model and you run it multiple times with the same information, you get a different result. And that's because of just the natural variability that's in the model. So it's reproducing natural variability reasonably well, but it's not reproducing it at in the same sequence as you see in reality, because it hasn't started off with exactly the same atmospheric conditions as we observed, and that's why you see differences. If this orange line was way above or way below our gray area for our model simulation of the historical period, then we would be worried, and we would be wondering, well, why is this model so different? But the fact that it's got a reasonably good overlap, and they're the odd places where it's beyond the range of the model, that's totally acceptable. But we wouldn't expect to see the same sequencing of events, just because I said that the models aren't set up with exactly the same atmospheric conditions as we had that resulted in the climate that we've observed.
Great, thank you for clarifying that. So there's also a question around the difference in the data quality for different regions based on the data that's collected. So, and should this be considered before you use the data? So for example, in areas that have fewer weather stations, or maybe there's more gaps in the data, should people use more caution in using this information?
Certainly for British Columbia, you do need to take a little bit more care with the data, and that's basically because there's far more topography in BC than there is in the climate model. So you need to be aware of sort of the elevation of the grid box compared to the elevation that you're at, because the 10-kilometer grid box may be at a certain elevation, and you might be considerably above or below it, and that can affect the information that's here. But in terms of the trends that are being projected, that's what we would expect to see. It doesn't really matter what elevation, you would expect to see these trends, but the actual numbers may be slightly different just because of the difference in the elevation of the grid box compared to where you actually are in that 10-kilometer grid box.
Great. Okay, and then just a couple of questions. So one is around if soil carbon information is included at all in these data portals.
We don't have anything on that at the moment. This is basically climate information. So that's not something that we certainly wouldn't be thinking of adding to our information at the moment.
And then going back to where you were looking at the analyze section, is it possible to select multiple variables when you're doing that?
No, not at the moment. You can do multiple grid boxes, but you can only do single variables at a time. So as I mentioned, you can keep the same grid boxes that you selected and just go back to the custom variable option and and redo the analysis. I have to go through the whole process of selecting everything to get through. But you can go back, if you've selected your grid boxes, you can go back to step 3 and choose another variable and submit the job again for processing. But you can't select multiple variables. You know, you have to fill in the thresholds so that it doesn't work for multiple variables. And I don't think that's probably an option that we would be adding. It complicates the computing process quite considerably. So it would be single variables only, I think.
Okay, and then just one last question, and then I'll let you finish up. People can still keep typing in your questions. The question is around using radiation data, and are there stations that are recording radiation data that is available through this platform?
The only thing that I would say is that if the information is collected by Environment Canada and it's in the recorded for a particular station, it will be in the station data file that's provided. That we're picking up the actual observations, so it has all of the different variables in that are recorded at that location. But without having looked at the individual stations, I don't know if radiation is in there or not, but if it's recorded, it would be, I think.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I stop sharing my screen. I think it's back to Christy.
Oh, how are we doing on time, Shauna?
Bit short, I think.
Yeah, we are a bit short. But yeah, I would dive in, and we can, people can stay on a little bit longer if they'd like, or just to give you guys a chance to wrap up. I think we have had a chance to go through most people's questions in pretty good detail.
Yeah, I think we've gone through the bulk of the data stuff. So that's, and now I'm at the back of my presentation. Okay. That got aggressive fast. So I think the next piece that we're going to go through is, so each of our sites, Climate Data and Climate Atlas, have different sectors or topic modules. And so we're going to go through Climate Data first, just because we're on the Climate Data train right now. And we're going to talk about the development of the agricultural sector that will be released soon, hopefully very soon. But we're just going to talk a bit of the outreach that we've done to the sector to help determine some of the contents that will be forthcoming. So the initial way that we've done the outreach is we've gone through a survey that we've distributed nationally in conjunction with Agriculture and Agri-Foods Canada. And so we had about 200 respondents that helped provide some insight into what they would like to see, how they like to use climate data, what variables would be of interest. And so we thought we would just go through a few of the questions and the results that came out, and just to give a glimpse into how we've made some of the decisions about what will be forthcoming in the ag sector module. And just to clarify, this is just the very beginning of developing a module for climate data. So there's obviously lots of opportunity for input and feedback, and we're going to go into that stage, some of those feedback stages after we've launched the module as well. But so right here we have one of the questions, and it's just identifying what are the priorities when it comes to climate change in agriculture. And so there's quite a wide range of responses, and some of them are more detailed than others, but a lot of it is really focused on the adaptation side. As you can see, it's one of the larger points that got responses, as well as changes in crops and crop viability and new crops that will be accessible. And so we started to take some of these notes into consideration when developing our case studies. And just adaptation obviously is a very broad concept to internalize, but with each of the case studies, we really do try to highlight adaptation measures as they pertain to the specific topic at hand. But this is just a glimpse of the array of responses that we got. And then this is a highlight, as we're talking about climate data, we're talking about indicators or variables that are very specific to agriculture. And so we did an initial scan on what would be of most use to people in the agricultural sector. And so the first 7 that we can see highlighted here are specific indicators that are being added when the new agricultural module will be launched. So there are ones that were considered of interest to folks in the ag sector. Additionally, the growing degree days of a few different bases, 4 and 15, were considered of interest, but through the analysis page that Elaine has just showed you, those will be accessible through that page as well. So the ones that'll be added are the frost-free season, cumulative precipitation from April 1st to October 30th, growing degree days, base 10 and base 5, and the first day of fall frost, last day of spring frost, drought indicators. So we're using the SPEI data information. And you can see that I am clearly not a focus person based on the fact that I couldn't go through all 7 of those in direct order, but I got through them. And then one of the other things that we're trying to look forward to as well is just some of the indicators that we aren't launching, our launching of the newest agricultural module, and what we can look forward to in the future. So this isn't a one-time thing where we add some agricultural information and then we're done with it. This is an ongoing process. And so one of the other questions really tried to dig into what other things could be added that weren't mentioned. And there was a wide range of things. And so this is just a few of the details that people added that they thought might be of interest. And Elaine would have a bit more insight into, I think we've talked a bit about drought indicators that might be added, but it's definitely a conversation that will be had as to what is available and feasible to add into climate data as we start to continue on with the development. And then one other thing that we tried to get to is just really how people would like to access the data. It's always nice to have all this data available to you, but really being able to access in a format in a manner that really suits your needs is something that is critical when you get to the end of your analysis process and all of a sudden you really just need it to be tangible in your hands or on your computer. And so we got into that detail as well, noting that files like CSVs and PDFs are really of interest. It's also interesting just noting the diversity that exists within the agriculture sector and how you share information, that when dealing with producers, it's nice to have simple outputs to put out. And then strong emphasis on visual products and having interpretations available was also something that we really came across. So, and then I think Elaine's going to do a tiny bit of information on the case studies that will be coming out for in the next month or so on climate data around the ag sector module.
Okay, so I will share my screen. Okay, and okay, hopefully everybody can see that. So as Christy mentioned, we're developing an agricultural module for climatedata.ca, which is where we provide data that's targeted to the agriculture sector. I mentioned in the presentation earlier that we already have a health module that's up and available, and the agricultural module will follow a sort of a similar outline. So basically what we do is we develop data at the in the format or for regions that have been requested by the user group. So for the health module, it was for the health regions in each of the provinces and territories. And what came out of the survey that Christy's just described was that the request was for information by the census region. So we will be adding that to climatedata.ca. And we also identified a number of case studies, 3 of which we've developed and will be added to the module. And the whole sort of reasoning behind the case studies is that they provide examples of how climate information has been used in assessments of climate change impacts and assessing vulnerability to future climate change. And within those case studies, we sort of showcase and link to the information which is available on climatedata.ca. So as a result of the survey and conversations with the working group that oversees the module development, we selected 3 different case studies. One's managing risk in Nova Scotia's grape and wine industry, one's on drought in the prairies, and one was on insect pests in Quebec. So the wine grape suitability in Nova Scotia was actually taken from a much larger risk assessment which Nova Scotia did for the whole of their agriculture sector. And the people involved in developing this actually contributed to the case study. They reviewed it for us, although one of Christie's colleagues actually wrote put the information together in the format for the module. And so basically at the end of the case study, we look at how suitability potentially will change into the future compared to current conditions 2018. And you can see that the greener areas, where they become more green, they become more suitable in the future for wine grape production. And so within the case study, it discusses the way that this was assessed and describes the scenarios which were used, and links to the information that's relevant on climatedata.ca. The next case study, we looked at drought in the prairies, and the drought indicator that we used in this instance is the standardized precipitation evapotranspiration index. This provides information about how wet or dry conditions will be in the future. And it's a slightly strange index in that it works at different time scales. So the indices that we'll be presenting here will be based on 12 months. And so you can select any 12-month period. And if you select August, it's basically for the agriculture year. It's for that month and the previous 11 months that the information is provided. And that's just how this particular index works. So this is basically the agricultural year. And the same thing, the information will be presented in the same way with the slider that you can move along the bottom and see how drought conditions are projected to change into the future. This standardized index 0 is sort of like normal conditions. Anything between 0 and 3 is increased wetness, and between 0 and -3 is increasing dryness. So you can see sort of like the central prairie area becoming more dry into the future. And again, it has exactly the same functionality as the other variables. You can change the RCPs and everything. It also works on a 3-month basis as well. So the other option for this is a 3 months. So that allows you to look at the seasonal information into the future. And we had Elaine Wheaton, who's very knowledgeable about drought on the prairies. She actually prepared this case study, and there's lots of information about the impacts on yields and possibilities for reducing the impact of projected future drought, adaptation options and things like that. And then finally, we worked with a group in Quebec. Whoops. My screen has just gone blank. I don't know. Oh, there we go. Hang on. Let's bring it up again. There we go. Who have been doing quite a lot of research into different insect pests. The one that we selected to demonstrate on climatedata.ca is known as the brown marmorated stink bug, the Punaise marbrée. And it's a bug that doesn't mind what it eats, and it doesn't really mind where it goes. So although the focus is on Quebec, this is a little pest that we'll probably see across most of Canada. And I know some of the authors or the people on the working group, you know, when they're in their yards now and they see this bug, they think, oh, brown marmorated stink bug. So we have some maps of how the different, with the dates of the different stages in the development of the stink bug, how they progress into the future. And we can see over time how it becomes more prevalent across Quebec. And so one of the things that we will be adding as a result of looking at this case study to the analysis page is the opportunity to calculate degree day thresholds, or what the dates by when certain degree day thresholds are reached, so that you can look at you know, how much earlier a particular developmental stage might be reached, which would imply that you could potentially have more than one generation of a particular pest in a year. So that will be another function or another index that will be added to the climatedata.ca analysis page. And those are the three case studies. And I say we'll be linking to the data, and we will hopefully have the agricultural module up pretty soon, like within a matter of weeks. We're hoping to. We're just in the process of looking at the rough drafts of how it will be presented, but it's just about ready to go on climatedata.ca.
Cool.
Great. Well, thank you for that introduction to the agricultural module. For everyone that's still on the webinar, we will follow up. We'll let you know when it's live and share that with you and with all the other ACARN members. It looks like we don't have questions specifically on the agriculture module. So thanks people for staying on a little bit longer. And thank you to all of our speakers today and for Kari and Jesse for helping out on the Q&A. Yeah, thanks so much. From the questions, you can see the people are really interested in the data that you've made available and how this can work. Actually, I do see a hand up here, so I should just take a quick peek here. Yeah, so just as a reminder, to access the recording, once we're complete the webinar, I will send out a link to the recording to everyone that was signed up today, and that will also be shared on the ACARN website, bcacarn.com.
I'll just quickly share, I have a screen with all of our information. So if people need to get a hold of anyone, if you have feedback or comments, the Prairie Climate Center and the info app for the Climate Atlas are there, and also the feedback information for climate data as well.